Okay, first things first, welcome to Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. My name's Yeoman Warder Matt Pryme. I'm one of the 37 Yeoman Warders that has the privilege to live and work here at the Tower. I'm going to be your guide. What we're going to do is very simply have a little wander around the Tower. I'll point out some of the more historic buildings. Of course, then I will tell you a little bit about their history. Our story here starts way back in the year 1066, when William, the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, defeats the Anglo-Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. Now he's got the cheek and temerity to declare himself King William I of England on Christmas Day of that year. He's got a problem on his hands. It's huge. The people of England, the Anglo-Saxons, they don't like him. They keep rebelling against him. Up and down the country he goes, putting down rebellions. He does a terrible thing. He goes to the north of England and he carries out what is known as the harrying of the North. He kills thousands and thousands of Englishmen and he wipes hundreds of villages off the map. Comes back down here to the south of England. He doesn't want to harry the south of England for two reasons. One, all the money and commerce is based here in the south. The second, more obvious reason is that the people in the south of England, well, they're a lot nicer than the people from north of England, aren't they? Controversial. So he decides he's going to impress and overawe the citizens of London. And to do that, he builds his first royal palace and fortress. Look behind you and up. There you will see the magnificent sight of the Union flag and 2 or 3 of the original turrets of the Tower of London. Don't worry though, we're going to see a perfect view of that building later on in the tour. Over the next few hundred years, this place gets bigger and bigger. In 1220, they built 13 towers in a circle around that, and they joined them up with a wall. We now call that the inner wall, because in 1280, they built 6 south-facing towers, 2 north-facing gun emplacements, and they joined them up with another wall, the outer wall, the one you see there behind you. The very last piece of this defensive jigsaw is the moat where we're standing now. It was not just a big old ditch full of water. It was an engineering masterpiece designed so twice a day at high tide, the River Thames would flow in, scour around, and then flow back out again. This was really important. There was no proper sewage system here, so all that human excrement and rubbish came over the walls into the moats. Twice a day, it all got flushed out clean into the River Thames. This system worked perfectly for well over 500 years. Unfortunately, the good people of Houndsditch and Shoreditch, 2 parts of London over there, they dug their own ditches in, they threw in all their rubbish and dead dogs, and it all floated down here. Became stagnant. People started to die of disease. Very reluctantly, in 1843, Queen Victoria gave permission for this moat to be filled in. All the water was drained, hundreds of tons of sand, shingle, and crushed oyster shells were poured into here. It raised the level to where we're standing now, which is about 15 feet deeper than it was before. This place has also been used for many things over those hundreds of years. It is a fortress. A fortress, very simply, is a large building designed to stop all the horrible people outside there, some of them over there, look, from getting inside there. This place was not designed to stop people getting out. It was never designed as a prison, became a prison. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this was a secure storeroom. Prior to 1303, the crown jewels of England, they were stored down in Westminster Abbey. They were looked after by some monks. In 1303, the monks, those pesky monks, a plot was discovered. They were planning to steal some of the jewels and sell them off. So the crown jewels were moved here in 1303 for safekeeping, and the abbot in charge of the monks, well, he was skinned alive, and they nailed his skin to the door of Westminster Abbey as a warning. This was an armoury, enough arms, armour and weapons here to equip an army of 100,000 men. This was the Royal Menagerie and Zoo. That was the King and Queen's personal collection of exotic animals and beasts. Here at the Tower there was lions, tigers, elephants, polar bears, brown bears, ostriches, wolves, monkeys, snakes, you name it, all kept here for the monarch's personal pleasure. Now, some monarchs liked them more than others. James I, a particularly odious little fella, he had a wooden platform built above the lion and tiger's cages. He would entertain his friends to dinner, while his horrible servants threw live cats and dogs over the walls into the lions and tigers. Terrible. By 1832, it was pretty obvious to everyone this was a terrible place to keep a load of massive wild animals. They were all taken to Regent's Park, right in the middle of London, where they formed a brand new zoo called London Zoo, still there to this very day. But this place starts to get famous as a prison, and it is handy for prisoners. Look to your right and up to the left of that crane, you'll see an elaborate white building. Above the ice rink, you'll see some trees. In between those two, there's an open area. It's called Trinity Gardens on Tower Hill. That was the site of the first official public execution site. Between 1381 and 1747, 75 men of noble birth lost their heads up there by means of block and axe. Let's imagine the scene on a day of execution. London today is an amazing city with a lot to do. It's not the case in the 14th century. Apparently there was nothing at all to do. London Eye hadn't been built, there was nothing on the TV, and nobody could read. If you was a peasant, you sat on the floor in your hovel, surrounded by your own filth, picking away at your boils and scabs, waiting to die of the plague. It was tedious. They're going to cut the head off a nobleman in public and for free. That was brilliant. It's like the World Cup final and the Super Bowl rolled into one massive event. Thousands would gather up there around a raised wooden platform known as the scaffold. They'd spend the morning drinking beer, getting excited, waiting for the main event. The main event would come through the archway there. There would be a lord with his hands bound in front of him, led by us Yeoman Warders. We'd lead him along the drawbridge, through the gates, to the top of the hill. There we would hand him over to the Sheriff of London. He would mount the scaffold steps, pay the executioner, say something witty to the crowd, and then lie down with his neck on a block of oak. A signal would be given, and down would come the axe, hopefully, not always, but hopefully beheading that fella with one stroke. By law, the severed head had to be picked up and shown to the crowd. There was also a legal proclamation. Behold the head of a traitor. So die all traitors. God save the king. Everyone would start cheering and chucking their hats up in the air because they knew there was quite a fun interactive bit coming up. Because the severed head was rammed onto a pike, a tall-handled soldier's spear. It was carried with much merriment. Children were dancing round it. That way, through the streets of London to London Bridge. London Bridge was the only bridge in London across the River Thames then. There the head pulled off the pike and rammed onto a special set of spikes above the gateway entrance to the city. It was there as a warning. You had to have a physical warning. I know it's difficult for the youngsters to imagine, but in those days there was no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook, any of that sort of thing. So you had a physical warning. When you came here to London on your long weekend, pulling your stupid little suitcase on wheels, you would look up and you would see a row of rotting heads dripping onto the pavement. Then you would realise that we were operating a zero tolerance policy to traitors. Some people are lazy, that's human nature. Couldn't be bothered to follow the head. That was fine. They could have a little bit of fun at the top of the hill with the headless bleeding corpse. The headless corpse was placed on a small open barrow. The barrow was pushed in and out of the crowd, and the crowd were encouraged to press forward and dip their handkerchiefs into the blood. It was meant to bring you good luck and cure illness. I can tell you now, it did neither of those two things. What you really did was you stuffed it in your waistcoat pocket. That night in the pub, you would pull it out to wipe your nose. All your friends would see the huge crusty blood stains, and they'd be jealous because you'd had a seat right at the front of the big execution, very much like having a selfie with Michael Bublé or someone like that would be today. The headless corpse going down the hill, go along Water Lane, turn left at Traitor's Gate, go through the archway of the bloody tower, up the steps, and be very quickly buried in an unmarked grave in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula. On the tour today, we're going to follow the same route as the headless bleeding corpse. Going to finish our tour next to where all those rotted bodies are buried. Little treat there for all the kids. Before we move off, I'll go into it a bit more later on. I've had some disciplinary problems with my chain of command and my tour. They didn't like various bits of it, didn't like this tour here because we moved off and I wasn't capturing the spirit of the crowd to take them with me. I don't really understand all that, but I was told to have a big finish to get everyone going with me. I've been working on a big finish. It's brand new for the new year. I've never tried it out yet. Tried it out at home in front of the dogs and they liked it. I've never tried it in front of the public, so bear with me while I mentally prepare. Okay, let's be heading off. Come on, let's go. Okay, here we are. Here we are in my favourite bit of the tower. But again, I've had some problems here as well. Here, I've got to remember the interview. They didn't like my tour here because I wasn't taking into account the demographic and the nationalities of the tour. I don't know what that means really, but I was just told I have to ask where people are and it will help me apparently. So let's do that. Is anyone here from the United States of America? Any Americans here today? Loads. Welcome home. Just think if you'd have paid your tax, all this history here, that would belong to you. But you didn't, and I admire what you did. I mean that. You chose the path, the rocky path of democracy. How's that working out for you? I'm not judging. What about Australians? Got any Australians here that get loads of time of the year? And there's no joke here. I love Australians. They're my favourite visitors. And I really hope you guys feel comfortable and at home here inside this English prison. What I've got to stop doing for my disciplinary record really is insulting the public. I've got to do that. But I get excited. And I can't help it because this is my favourite part of the tower. It is not architecturally the best, but this is one of the crucibles of English history, and the things that have happened here and around here changed this country, and they've changed the people we've become. Behind me, the famous Traitor's Gate. Not always called Traitor's Gate. In fact, its original name is a fantastic example to our American cousins, friends, and indeed allies, that we know it's bigger, we know it's better, we know you've spent more money on it in America. We've always had it first. This gate was originally known as the Watergate. Explain that to the kids later. Its name was changed to the Traitor's Gate in the Tudor period because of the many traitors that would come here straight from their trials up at the Palace of Westminster. There they'd have been found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. They'd be loaded on a small open barge. They'd be rowed down the cold dark waters of the Thames. People would gather on the side of the bridge to boo and jeer them. They'd get nervous. Through the river mists would appear the mighty battlements of the Tower of London. Just when they thought they couldn't get any more nervous, they'd be rowed through this dark tunnel, through these original gates, up the original steps to here. This, for me, and I hope for you, this is where history comes alive. Right where you're standing now, 4 queens of England have stood trembling with fear. One of them, the lucky one we've discussed, Princess Elizabeth Tudor, Queen Elizabeth I, but not quite so lucky as her. The second wife of Henry VIII, Queen Anne Boleyn, dragged up here, met by us Yeoman Warders, thrown into her accommodation. Then the 5th wife of Henry VIII, Queen Catherine Howard, dragged up here and imprisoned. Poor Lady Jane Grey, the uncrowned child queen of only 9 days, bewildered young girl, dragged up here and imprisoned. Those 3 ladies, those 3 queens of England, are still here in the tower. They're in the chapel under the floor, minus their heads. I'll tell you all about that and show you where it happened a little bit later. But from now, I'd like to look up and left. You'll see there the outside of the Wakefield Tower. It looks like every other tower. It's not. To get inside there, go up the steps on your right and through the medieval palace. It was the King's audience chamber. In the audience chamber, there's what we call a day chapel, tiny little chapel. Only room for 1 person to pray at a time. On the 21st of May, 1471, just after 11 o'clock at night, King Henry VI of England was kneeling in there at prayer. He's a very pious man. In came two knights. One smashed him on the back of the head with a spiked mace, while another one repeatedly stabbed him in the kidneys with a dagger. King of England was assassinated on that spot. Move round further and up, you see the back there of the Bloody Tower, originally called the Garden Tower, as it overlooks a beautiful little garden. Its name was changed to the Tower of Blood, then the Bloody Tower, because of the many famous and many terrible things that have happened in there. And there's none more famous, and there's none more terrible than the disappearance and the murder of the two boy princes, the young uncrowned King Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, the Duke of York. They're running little boys. They were 12 and 9. When the 12-year-old became king, after the death of their father, Edward IV, their kindly uncle, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, had them brought back separately to the Tower by military means. He told them he would look after them. He told the eldest he would be his Lord Protector, help him rule the country, show him what to do, then step away. None of those things happened. He had them declared illegitimate by Parliament, and then he had himself crowned King Richard III of England. We're told those poor boys were stabbed and suffocated to death in that room, moved the next day by a priest and buried under some stone stairs being newly constructed on the south side of the White Tower in the middle. They lay there undisturbed for 191 years. In 1674, those stairs were demolished and the workmen found a wooden chest. They ripped it open, thinking it was treasure. It was the dusty bones of two boys, one 12 and one 9. Charles II, king at the time, had them removed to a beautiful little tomb called Innocents' Corner in Westminster Abbey, still there to this very day. If you look behind you and up in the top of the Bloody Tower archway, you'll see a spiked Norman dropgate or portcullis. It's very simply a heavy metal tipped gate designed to be let down at speed to dig into the floor, stop the enemy getting in during a siege. It's a marvel of medieval engineering, as it is 750 years old. It's totally original and it's in perfect working order. Hollywood tells us that a man with a blue face, Australian accent, wearing some sort of skirt, can hold that up while all his little friends run in and out stabbing English soldiers. Not the case. It weighs 2.5 tons. It took 30 men to raise and lower that. In a moment, though, we're going to go straight through there into the inner ward of the Tower of London. Just want to remind you, above your head will be a 2.5 ton, 750-year-old spiked gate, kept in the raised position by 750-year-old fixings, will not stay in the raised position forever. If today is the fateful day and you hear a creaking followed by a whooshing sound, I recommend you very quickly grab a small child as some sort of shield. Now, my children have all left home. Would anyone like to lend me a small child? Okay, Coach, take a gap. Let's go through into the inner ward. Right, here we are in the inner ward of the Tower of London. Very simply, we're right in the centre, and some of you may have spotted it. There it is behind you. That is the original Tower of London. William's Norman keep was built, would you believe, in the year 1078. But with one reason only, to impress and overawe the citizens of London. That it would have done. The peasants of London, living in one-storey Watland daub houses, that's over 90 feet tall. All of our kings and queens lived in there for well over 500 years. They lived on the top floor there, away from the sights, sounds and smells of all the horrible common people. The floors below, a banqueting hall, an audience chamber, the oldest Norman chapel in the country is there, and accommodation for knights, ladies, bodyguards. Today, that place is full of arms, armour and weapons. You must visit it. To get there, you go to the end and turn right twice. The stairs are on the other side. When we've finished, you're ready to go wherever you want. I'm going to very quickly take you around the buildings. If you look in the left-hand corner behind the tree, that is the entrance to the Bloody Tower. Downstairs, we'll tell you about the imprisonment and execution of one of our most famous sailors, Sir Walter Raleigh. Upstairs, more information, short film on the disappearance and the murder of the two boy princes. Over there, in between those two sets of blue doors, that is all private residential accommodation. I live here at the Tower, as do all of my colleagues, and we live in the blue doors there, some of those friends of mine. But in between, the black and white L-shaped building, that is the only surviving timber frame Tudor building left in the city of London. All of the rest were destroyed in the Great Fire of London of 1666. It was built in 1540 by Henry VIII, and he built it for the boss of the tower. We now call them the constables. There's been 160 of them. The 160th, who lives there now, General the Lord Horton of Richmond. He lives there with his wife, Lady Horton. He retired 3 years ago as the head of all of our armed forces. If you move around further, there's a beautiful stone tower there, the Beauchamp Tower. That's where the high-value prisoners were kept. If you go inside there and upstairs, you'll see intricate carvings that they made on the stonework. There's over 90 carvings in there, and some of them are 500 years old. Behind me, 2 more blue doors. Again, private residential accommodation. The one directly behind me, that's the Royal Doctor. We are locked in at night, and he is our medical cover. Next to him, the Royal Chaplain's just walked down the stairs. Actually, he's in charge of the beautiful Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, built in 1520 by Henry VIII. That is open to the general public. The last building I bore you with, there it is, that is the mighty Waterloo Barracks, built in 1845 to replace a burned down storeroom. It was built by our most famous soldier. He laid the keystone with his bare hands, the Iron Duke, the Duke of Wellington, and he named it the Waterloo Barracks to remind us and future generations of his defeat and the final destruction, thank God, of the French tyrant Napoleon Bonaparte. Excuse me, man. Yes. The French tyrant Napoleon Bonaparte. It held 1,000 soldiers of the Royal Guard. It still today holds the Royal Guard, but they're upstairs. The whole bottom floor, something you might be interested in. If you go through the door underneath that golden clock, you will see the crown jewels and the royal regalia of Great Britain, one of the largest collections of precious stones and precious metal in the world. In there, you'll see the largest cut diamond in the world, 530.2 carats, the Star of Africa, the Cullinan one. It's the size of an egg. It's beautifully mounted. It is beautifully lit. You are taken past it on a moving walkway. Ladies, your eyes will see that diamond. Then your heart will want that diamond. When you move from there to the next display, under no circumstances must you look down at your left hand. You do that, those thoughts that have been swirling around the back of your mind for years, they'll become words. Those words will be transferred to the front of your mind, and in one blinding flash, you'll realise you've married a loser. Only the women laughing. This is Tower Green, the village green of the Tower of London, my village green. I've lived in a lot of villages, always had a green space, always had something cool on the green space. Duck pond, pub, little play area for the kids, cricket pitch. We haven't got anything on our grass, we're not even allowed to walk on it. We've got one thing, and it's horrible. We've got a disgusting piece of modern art. There, look, horrible. See that horrible piece of modern art? That's on a small paved area. The paved area is a private royal execution site. Don't get that mixed up with Tower Hill. 75 executions there, only 6 here. 3 of them, though, to be fair, were Queens of England. They would build a brand new scaffold platform for every execution. Lords and ladies' invitation would stand where you're standing now. Let's go back in time to the year 1536. It's everyone's favourite queen. It's the second wife of Henry VIII, Queen Anne Boleyn. She's been tried, found guilty of trumped-up charges, incest, adultery, witchcraft. She's sentenced to death and imprisoned here at the Tower, but she's convinced that Henry VIII still loves her. So she bombards him with letters begging for his forgiveness. He ignores them all. Eventually, she's got one last chance. That scaffold's nearly finished. She sends one more letter to Henry VIII begging forgiveness. This time she puts in with it a letter from her personal physician, her doctor. In it he says, in his medical opinion, Anne Boleyn's developed what he calls a great fear. Nowadays, medically, we would call that a psychological fear. He says that Anne Boleyn's developed a psychological fear of the axe. She's developed a psychological fear of having her head cut off with a massive axe. That's not rare. I've got that. Now, he wrote back to her, he's a lovely guy. He said, of course, my dear, I'm not going to go against medical opinion. I'll have your head cut off in the French manner with a double-handed sword. And that's exactly what he did. He bought a very expensive, very experienced executioner from St. Omer via Calais. The scene was set. Lords and ladies here. Anne Boleyn was kneeling there. Behind her was the executioner and his assistant. He was a clever man. He'd hidden the sword behind him under some straw and sacking, but he said in a very clear voice, "Go and fetch my sword." The assistant walked down the steps, round the back of this crowd, disappeared behind the chapel. Anne Boleyn naturally leant forward and looked left. She wanted to see the sword come, but this exposed the back of her neck. He silently took out the sword, and in one glittering arc, the razor-sharp weapon took her head clean off. The man was a genius. 2 diaries of the day tell us what happened next. The head came off, spun around once. As it touched the floor, he picked it up by the hair and showed it to the crowd. He was about to make the legal proclamation, "Behold the head of a traitor." Before he could utter a word, the crowd let out a huge gasp and 2 ladies hit the floor in a dead faint. We're told that Anne Boleyn's eyes were looking around and her mouth was moving in silent prayer. She'd been killed so quickly, but painlessly, I like to think, thank God, that poor young woman didn't even know that she was dead. Not quite so lucky. 6 years later, the axe fell twice here on the same day. This time, it was the 5th wife of Henry VIII, Queen Catherine Howard. Now, there's no doubt in my mind, having studied many, many executions as part of my job, that this execution, without doubt, is my absolute favourite. I love this execution. And no, it's not because I'm weird. It's because this one's a beautiful love story. Because she's been tried and found guilty on not trumped-up charges. She's guilty. She's had an affair whilst married to Henry VIII. She doesn't love Henry VIII. It's a political marriage. She's 20, he's 50. The man she had the affair with was the love of her life. She loved him with all of her heart. It was a beautiful thing. Of course, his name was a secret. We know it historically now. His name was Sir Thomas Culpeper, and he worked at court. And he was a true Englishman who I very much admire. Because when these rumours started to spread around the court, the Queen was having an affair, he did what any Englishman would do. He stayed where he was, he stuck by his guns, he risked his own life to support the woman that he loved. Then these rumours started to escalate. Now they said the Queen was about to be arrested and tried for treason. If found guilty, she'd be sentenced to death, as would the lover, if and when they found him. Again, he did what any Englishman would do. He went to the market, purchased a large bag, which he filled with all of his belongings, and he cleared off. He's not going to hang around, is he? He's having an affair with Henry VIII's wife. He's gone, she's arrested, tried for treason, found guilty, sentenced to death, and she's executed here. Now, the crowd gathered. She really couldn't care less. Without the love of her life, life had no meaning for her. Death could not come quick enough. She mounted the scaffold. In her hand was a piece of paper. It was a goodbye speech. She couldn't even be bothered to write it herself. It had been written by her priest. It was the shortest one possible, 3 lines. Forgive my sins, pray for my soul, pray for the king. Before she could utter these 3 lines, she glanced at this crowd and her heart nearly burst out from her chest. Standing right in the middle, with his hood up to protect his identity, with his eyes locked upon her like a laser, risking his life to say goodbye to the woman he loved. Was that him? Was that Sir Thomas Culpeper himself? She wasn't reading this rubbish. She drops the paper. She walks to the front of the scaffold. She raises her arms to the sky. She says, "I die today, the Queen of all England. But would I be dying the wife of the only one man I've ever truly loved?" And there he is, Sir Thomas Culpeper. He's dragged off, obviously, and executed himself. She's getting her own back, or she's declaring her love. Who knows? Because down she goes, and down comes the axe. Then, Down comes the axe again. Then down comes the axe third time. Took 3 goes to get through her slender neck. Then down came her lady in waiting. She was luckier. Her head was cut off in 1 stroke. Her crime was treason. She knew of the affair, had not told the king. I think her crime was loyalty to her mistress. A tragedy. All executions are a tragedy, to be fair. Someone's killed. However, in my opinion, the last royal execution to take place here is the tragedy of the Tower of London, if not medieval history. It's a woman called Lady Jane Grey. She's known as the uncrowned child queen of only 9 days. Bewildered young girl, probably only 15 or 16 when all this starts. She's just got married to the 17-year-old Lord Guildford Dudley. 2 kids just starting their life. She happens to be the cousin of the dying King Edward VI. He knows he's dying. He's dying of tuberculosis. He's only 15 years old. Officially next in line to the throne is his half-sister, Bloody Mary Tudor. He doesn't want her to be queen. Not because she's horrible and cruel, which she was, but because she's a Roman Catholic and he's a Protestant. He wants a Protestant queen. So what he does, makes a secret will to be opened on his death. This will says he's going to skip Bloody Mary Tudor and name this innocent cousin of his as queen. She knows nothing of it. He dies, the will's open. Imagine her surprise. She's woken up in the middle of the night. Congratulations, Your Majesty, you're the Queen of England. Take your boy husband, move into the White Tower, Tower of London, start to plan your coronation. That's what they did. The kids moved in there and they started to plan a huge party. But Mary heard the news. She wasn't very happy. She was a very strong-willed woman, as this nation was about to find out. She raised her private army and she marched it to London. When she got here, the people of London and the military garrison, they agreed with her. She was next in line to the throne. If they'd have known what life was to be like under Mary Tudor, they might not have agreed, but they did. There was a bloodless coup. The doors of the tower were thrown open. Mary's soldiers marched in, up the stairs, arrested those 2 kids. They were tried, found guilty of treason, sentenced to death, and imprisoned back here. Guildford Dudley, imprisoned in the Beauchamp Tower. If you go upstairs, you'll see a carving that he made above the fireplace. Lady Jane Grey was imprisoned in the black and white Queen's house in the corner. On the day of execution, we get a little glimpse into the cruel mind of Bloody Mary Tudor, because that young girl was made to stand on the balcony in the corner. It's still there. She knew she was to die. Why was she there? She was there so they could parade her boy husband in front of her in chains. She was made to stay there as he was taken down these stairs and outside, and she was made to listen to the roar of the crowd as his head was cut off in public. Then she was brought down here to die herself. The lords and ladies gathered. She went to mount the scaffold, was pulled back by Mary's soldiers and told to wait. Didn't know why she was waiting. She waited nearly 20 minutes. The crowd are getting nervous. What's going on? Then, to everyone's horror, they realised what they were waiting for. They were waiting for the headless corpse of her boy husband to be pushed in on a cart so it could be pushed over to her so she could be forced to look at it before her own death. She's a child. This is disgusting. But she's a brave child. I admire her. She told her family she wanted to die well. She mounted the scaffold steps and knelt down. A kind priest put on a blindfold. This wasn't in the plan. When she put her hands out, she couldn't touch the wooden block. She did the one thing she didn't want to do. She lost control, started to cry. She cried out, "Help me, please, God, help me. I don't know what to do." Then she started to sob. The crowd had had enough. They'd seen all this cruelty, and they started to boo and jeer. The priest now panicked. It was his fault. He pushed her hard between the shoulder blades. She fell full length forward, and her hands shot out to break her fall. As they did, they touched the wooden block. Miraculously, this amazing young girl regained her composure completely. She knelt up, she took off the blindfold, and she threw it away. She turned to face her executioner. She said, "I will give the signal that ends my young life." She lay down and put her neck on that block. She raised her own right arm, and as she brought it down, down came the axe and cut her head off with one stroke. Child involved in a political game that had nothing to do with her. I think that's the tragedy of the Tower of London. Those 3 ladies, 3 queens of England, are buried in the chapel on the other side of that wall in a row in front of the altar, reburied in 1876 in a Christian service by Queen Victoria. everyone who was executed was reburied by Queen Victoria in 1876 in a Christian service. Everyone has had a proper burial. Coming to the end of the tour, in a bit you better have a wander around. You all come across Yeoman Warders or Beefeaters. We are the oldest continuously uniformed body of men and women in the world. We were formed in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth, when the new king, Henry VII, killed the old king, Richard III. He named 120 of his bodyguards, his new knights, to be his personal bodyguard. They followed the kings around until 1603, when 40 of us were chosen to stay here, be in charge of the tower, look after the jewels, and be in charge of the military. We're still here. To apply for this amazing job, you must have served a minimum of 22 years in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. You must have won a certain medal for being a good lad, and you must have been able to reach the rank of Sergeant Major, or the equivalent. If you were unfortunate and ended up joining the Air Force or the Navy, then you can apply to come. This is an amazing job and we love it. So when you see the Yeoman Warders, please feel free to interact with them. We know you're tourists. We know you've paid nearly 30 quid to get in. You can ask us where the toilets are. You can ask us for a photo. Tell us you've lost your iPad and all your kids. We'll sort all that out. Part of the job. It is not the best part of the job. The best part of the job, you read a book, you watch a documentary or a film, or you want to know about this amazing place, ask one of the Yeoman Warders. Some of them, or one of them in particular, has been here 20 years. We live and breathe this place. Now that's the end of the tour virtually. I've enjoyed it, I always do. If you want to do that modern thing where you go onto Twitter or TripAdvisor, whatever it's called, my name is Yeoman Warder Matt Pryme. But if I've offended you in any way, my name's Yeoman Warder Phil Wilson. What I would really love you guys to do now is spend 2 or 3 hours just digging around this amazing piece of British history. Thank you for listening, folks. Go and enjoy the Tower of London. Thank you very much. Cup of tea.
Thank you.
You're welcome, my friend.